Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tara Jacquin, Associate Account Director here at Cision and your moderator for the webinar. Today, we'll be looking at the results and trends that have emerged from our latest State of the Press release, where we analysed over 100,000 press releases. These include best practices, including headlines, multimedia, and timing. Also, what makes a story newsworthy? And I think we all can agree that with the impact of COVID-19, this has had a real impact on our news cycle. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you'll take away some ideas on how better to write, format, and distribute your very own press releases. But before I go ahead, just a little bit of housekeeping as well for you before we start. We're tweeting and using the hashtag SOTPR2020. So that's hashtag SOTPR2020. So keep an eye out on the Cision UK Twitter handle and feel free to get involved in the conversation. Also, if you have any questions at all, do submit those questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll leave some time at the end to answer as many questions as possible. Also, an on-demand copy of the recording will be made available afterwards. And finally, you can download the report and other resources located in the box at the bottom of your screen. As you can see also, there's additional housekeeping items and widgets you can see here. So there are some for you to familiarize yourself with for today's session. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce you to our brilliant panel of speakers, and who better to join me for this conversation than our very own Head of Distribution, Liam Power, and PR Newswire Senior Client Services and Ops Manager, Fawzia Hussain. Thank you both for joining me.
Hi.
And really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all things press releases, and I'm sure the audience are too. Thank you both for joining.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Right, let's kick off, shall we, with the very important question: is the press release still relevant? As technology and the media landscape evolves, it's important to keep asking this question year on year, but our findings say that it is still relevant and still a staple source of information. Right, let's hear from Liam. Has this always been the case, and can you predict what might have happened in the year to come?
Hi, Tara. Thanks. And again, it's great to be here and at this opportunity. And thanks to everyone for joining. Looking forward to kind of walking through not only, as we're saying here, the press release's relevance, but also those best practices that can really help make sure that your press release gets the best possible pickup and engagement. So, it's interesting, right? I mean, things are constantly changing, and now we have so many different ways of getting out information and engaging our audience. But what's really interesting is we've done the research and year in, year out asked the question, consistently we've seen the answer from journalists that they do really believe in the press release. It's a very important part. It continues to be a very important part of their work. And particularly when you think about today, not only in the world of COVID that we're living in, but in general, journalists very inundated. There's less resources for them to rely on, and they've got more and more content and more coverage that they have to do. And so when you think about the press release, it ends up being a tremendous source of information for them. And Faz will get more into sort of some of the numbers around that, but journalists view it as when it's relevant, when the content has high quality and it's delivered to them, they can use it then for content that they're trying to create. And then so the more that they can use that and repurpose it, the better it is. And I think that in today, when again, they're so busy, the more you can provide them with that kind of information, the more you can build that trust and relationship with journalists. And then the last thing I would say, and you'll kind of hear us talk through this a lot today as well, is the importance of just making sure that the content you're sending them is very relevant, that it's timely, and that it's something they can use for their audience. I mean, they get just hundreds of not only releases but emails and all sorts of information coming at them. So the more you can make it relevant, the better to their audience. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, it is certainly continues to be a very important part of that ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liam. Glad to hear that. And I think also from And also just from our report as well, we found that 72% of journalists agree that the press release is just the most useful type of content that PRs can deliver. So I know working with clients day in, out in my job, that people, PRs do ask, is a press release still relevant? So I think this suggests us that by sending press releases, you're more likely to build a better relationship with the journalist. These points are listed here to explain how PRs can deliver better content. And I'll get Fawzia to talk that through in a bit more detail. So over to you, Fawzia.
Thank you. Yes, it's great to be here and to share all these ideas and get the information out there for everybody. So yeah, like you said, Tara, pitching to the right audience is a key factor here. Looking at these like three pointers here, which is, journalists are always in search of high quality content. So make sure your content is of high quality and it is relevant to the audience. Make sure like you have a clear news angle and it's precise to the point, which is very important. And more than all those points, say it's easy to follow. You don't want to have any jargon. You don't want to have any acronyms. You want to make it clear, precise, so it's easy read for everybody.
Liam, did you have any other points you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think these are the key ones. I would also say that when you think about these points, it equally applies, I think, to the press release as it gets posted online, as it distributes to different audiences. Journalists are looking at it for a very particular reason and they want to be able to reuse it. But when you think about even the broader audiences, I think these same things apply very much. The high quality, making sure that there's something someone can take away from it, and then making sure that people have access to more information. And we'll talk again later about some of the sort of linking strategies you can have and ways to make the press release more engaging. But I think what we're talking about here and the level to which journalists appreciate it, I think it applies to the broader audience you're trying to reach as well.
And I think we were talking so separately earlier, as well as obviously making sure your content's relevant, but also making sure that the press releases are targeted to the right journalists rather than blasting thousands and thousands of the press release to journalists, but make sure that you're targeting the right journalist who covers the particular beats that you cover.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's like I think possibly the hardest part of the job, right? It's really being able to understand and having the information as to what the journalist is tracking. And I think it's both in terms of like what they're posting on social media, where they're influencing, the conversation, and then where obviously they're publishing. And some journalists publish on a number of different sites or publications. And so, it's really important to kind of understand what news they're looking for. And I think, Tara, we were talking earlier as well that with COVID in particular, there's a lot of journalists have been pulled now in different directions. They're covering different things. And so, keeping up to date on that is really important as well to be effective.
Definitely. And I guess, the really big question, and I'm sure it's on everyone's mind and lips, is, what makes a story newsworthy? And I think, there can be quite a lot of a bias what story is newsworthy. So the state of the press release surveys reported on 5 elements of newsworthiness, and I think these included timelines, proximity, human interest, impact, and relevance. And I think during the pandemic, as we've hit upon, we're seeing proximity highlighted even more as people are gaining a real interest in what's happening on their doorstep. Fawzia, can you expand on these points at all, please?
Yeah, definitely, Tara. So like you said, proximity, if I was to pick any one of these right now in this climate, it's definitely high on everyone's agenda. It's important more than ever when people are increasingly more connected with their local communities, in their local environments, the working from home factor as well. So that this element definitely plays an important role in today's timelines. Again, is one where, news has to be current. You don't want to be sending out something that was spoken about last week. And an impact is another important one, I would suggest, is because, you want the story to hit home. You want the reader to think that, if I use this service or this particular product, it will enhance my lifestyle. It will help me in my daily life. So these are all really relevant elements that everyone should be thinking of. And then stories, especially that have like, visual graphs, tables, charts, are another easy copy for journalists to visualize and go beyond the picture. It helps read the data better as well. We'll be elaborating on multimedia assets and assets as such later on through the presentation. We'll be coming back to this point quite regular. But yeah, so sometimes if you have a data and you have a table or numbers, it's sometimes easy on the eye and an easy read if it's in like a graph format or an infographic, making it easier to digest the information as well, which is equally important.
Fantastic, Fawzia. Thank you so much. I'm noticing the Q&A. There's questions about sort of, timings and using photos and videos. So we will come on to that, guys. So don't worry. Very, very. It's like someone's seen our slides beforehand. So we will get to those.
Right.
Liam, do you have any more sort of do's and don'ts as well in terms of, what makes a story newsworthy?
No, not too much more. I think Foz really covered it off there. Again, I think it's, what's interesting is that you have, I think, the ability to reuse a lot of content you already have. Sometimes I think we view press releases, it's like, news, a new thing. But like, for example, right now my wife is out, I think based on the text I just got, she did buy the new washing machine that we need to have. But when you think about some of these type of human interest stories, like, how to pick the washing machine or the mower, or like, what are the top 5 things you need to consider when thinking about retirement? I think those type of stories, and Foz mentioned this, the human interest piece, are really, really important and can get great pickup. And I think sometimes, you kind of have more of that around in terms of content than you might realize. The other thing too, today, I think in the environments we're in, thought leadership pieces, and I think obviously the corporate social responsibilities, and we'll cover this again too in a while about some of the changing in the type of content that's going out. But there is a lot that you can use there to increase engagement. And the one last thing I would say, we'll just keep reminding everyone about this. The more you can add visual assets, the better. The more you can put in a graph or an infographic, it really, really is critical. And the data continually shows the feedback that those type of releases get better pickup. If you think about it, any news feed you see now today, there's always a picture and some text, or there's a graph and some text. And so the more you can kind of hand that, I think, to the journalist and include it in your content, the better. So it really, really is an important point that we keep making, and certainly I think it really increases your chances of pickup.
I think in this day and age, there's so much information and data that an infographic, if PRs can create that one quite clearly, it kind of makes it easy for the journalists, doesn't it? It helps them write the story, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, just going to sort of look at some of the highlights from the state of the press release as well. So let me run through those quickly for everybody now. As I mentioned at the top of the session, we analysed more than 100,000 press releases that were sent out for the study that was distributed through PR Newswire service last year. And PR Newswire is a Cision-owned network, just in case anyone wasn't aware. And basically, we send thousands of press releases on behalf of PRs each week, meaning that we are in a very good position to discuss this topic of press releases in such detail as well for you. So this year, I think we're all in agreement. It's been a real unprecedented time for everybody, and we've seen a dramatic change in the press release topics as a result of COVID-19. And as we were talking, this graph shows the decline in the future events being announced, which really comes as no surprise. Liam, can you discuss these changes in a bit more detail for us, please?
Yeah, sure. I obviously it's no surprise, I think, that, given the year we're in, that we've seen some dramatic changes in the types of press releases going out. No surprise, obviously, the trade shows and future events, significant drop off in those type of news releases. Equally, we saw, a significant drop off earlier this year, in particular in travel, entertainment, and a lot of the things that you wouldn't be surprised to see. And then, of course, on the other side, saw a lot more releases around public safety, hospitals, healthcare, and then interestingly, and again, not really surprising, but the increase in that social responsibility releases. So seen a lot of content where companies are talking about how they're helping their employees, how they're working through this with their customers, and in particular, we've seen a lot, I think, more about how companies are helping their local communities and what they're doing in this environment to help. So that's kind of, I think, where we've seen the change. And as of course you said, I think there's just been a lot more news. You got to kind of fight your way through. What's interesting too is we've seen, actually, we didn't put it here because it wasn't quite as big a change, but there has also been quite an uptick in new product announcements. So I think people are at home more. Some people perhaps are looking for new careers, and so there's been a lot, I think, of that innovation happening, a lot of innovation within healthcare and what's going on with COVID. So certainly seeing that increase there as well. And then the last thing I would say, and it's kind of interesting to watch, in terms of some of the travel and other kind of content where people are now obviously, kind of adjusting to COVID, talking about maybe short-term staycations or rentals and different types of ways that people are approaching it. So, again, and definitely seeing recovery. I don't know if we're all living with the new normal right now, but I think you're seeing companies kind of re-engaging and starting to see, continue to see that value of sending out the PR. So that's, the changes there.
Fantastic. I think, as we mentioned about sort of graphs and, and sharing information and so on, I think we'll move that on to slowly. But do you guys have any tips or in terms of how best to share any graphs and images?
But you can probably add to this. I think, I think what we see that works very well is, particularly for infographics, I know someone had that question, you want to try and have it so that it can almost stand alone and tell its own story, right? So that, again, increasingly, I think we're seeing people want to use something graphic that can just tell the story. So the more you can do that, the better. And again, anything that you can imagine a journalist or someone could just kind of cut and paste out and use is where I think is most effective.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with Liam on that. If you have the infographic will show like short story with all the information there. But equally, then if you do have like a graph which is clickable and downloadable for then bloggers to reuse their magazines and stuff, it would be very beneficial.
Thank you both. Timing, isn't this the $1 million question, I suppose?
Now, yes.
now we're talking about timing, and I think it did pop up in the Q&A, so this is obviously an excellent time to kind of address that. Fawzia, in terms of timing and when to send out press releases, I think our findings show that Tuesday morning seems to be the best. Do you agree with this and have any other insight?
So I've been working with PR Newsworthy since 2007, so I think I can confidently say, yes, I think the window between Tuesday and Thursday works the best on the days. Monday, I guess everyone's coming into their busy inboxes, but things have evolved since I started. So, news has become like the 24/7 the 24/7 medium because of social media as well. So, but Mondays is still reserved as a day where everyone just goes through their inboxes, their emails, and then Friday is winding down towards the weekend. So the windows between Tuesday and Thursday, definitely, I would say, are the most best time to send it. Also, 52% of the copy is sent on the hour, quarter past the hour, 30 minutes and 45 minutes, which then means that, you sending out your press release, I would highly avoid these times because it would just get lost in the whole block of 10 o'clock releases, 8 o'clock releases. So using the odd minutes, so your 8:03s, your 9:47s, your 10:53s, using those times would be better because there'd be like a shorter length of releases showing up on any website, whereas the 10 o'clock will be a big long list of releases. So that is highly recommended to send your releases out then on those timings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As you mentioned about sort of Monday being quite a busy day, would it be advisable to look at maybe sending out press releases on Sundays, or do you think the study hasn't shown any sort of insight about Sundays, just more Tuesday to the Thursday is best?
That is a very good question. It does. I would at this point say it would depend on your target audience, because then Sundays you do have Israel and the Middle East. Well, our Sunday would be their Monday. So if you're targeting specific countries in the Middle East or Israel, then I definitely say Sunday would be a good option for those markets or for those type of newses.
Fantastic, thank you. Again, this came up in the Q&A, so it's good that, as I mentioned earlier, someone saw our slide ahead of time.
They have, haven't they?
Talking about sort of attachments and, multimedia, videos, images and things like that. I appreciate that PRs have a lot of these assets in the multimedia, the videos, that kind of thing. Can you give us some top tips and best practice for that, Fozia, in terms of how best to add any multimedia assets to an existing press release?
Yes, definitely. So I know we've touched on this before, and I'm going to say it again, adding an image, we refer to it as a multimedia, definitely increases the chances of your release being looked over tenfold. This could be like a thumbnail image. Especially if you're announcing like a CEO, include their headshot. Even something simple as a company logo, because that logo will be embedded in that reader's mind when they're reading it, and then when they see it elsewhere on your advertising boards or wherever else you're advertising, it just retains with that reader, and they can obviously think back to the release and like the news that you put out. So then you are hitting the broader market. Definitely with infographics is another important one that we've already discussed, and short videos. So sometimes what happens is a headline will be intriguing. Someone read the headline, then the subheadline will provide some context. And then if it's a short video, sometimes that will be very useful and helpful for the reader if they're running short on time, just to have a quick look at the video that will show some interest, and then perhaps do a little bit more reading and maybe do a little bit more research. And then that people remember things like that. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, it's interesting too. I mentioned earlier about thinking of assets that you have that you're using in other channels that you can use to enhance your press release. And we had a client recently who had sent out a press release, and we were sort of reviewing it with them as to how they could have improved. And in sort of in the center of the press release, best practice, they had put an image, a logo, but then we had found on their social media feed they had a great 45-second video on some of their properties. And so we encourage them to think about putting something like that in that space, because to your point, then it's a quick, easy way that an audience, someone can quickly look at it, or a journalist can use that and insert it as well if they wanted to. So it really is, again, more and more a really important part of what you want to do when you're sending out in any press release, to put some visuals in there or video links.
I just had as I thought it might be good to bring up just before we have the Q&A, as we're talking about the multimedia. Obviously, a lot of us and journalists are working from home and things like that. And, if a PR are not using a service such as PR Newswire, would sort of sending multimedia assets and things like that get blocked by the journalists' servers, or things like that? Do you have any thoughts on that particular point?
We do request it to be certain measurements, and it will be part of the press release. So it will show up in the body of the press release, and we also include, so where it wouldn't render on third-party websites, there'd be links going directly to the visuals, like the multimedia, like if it's an image or a logo. We definitely have that rendering as a link on websites that don't. So there really isn't any pressure to think that it'd be rejected or it'd be blocked.
Fantastic. Good to know. I thought that was a timely question to put to you, but yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much. Right. Just moving a little bit now from multimedia, I guess essentially how many words do you put in a press release as well? I think from my own experience, I've seen very long press releases and short ones as well. So I think it's nice. We have this nice quote here: longer than a tweet and shorter than War and Peace. I think we can explain this graph in a bit more detail, Fawzia. So over to you to talk about, how much time people spend reading a press release and the word count, that they lose their attention once it gets too long.
Absolutely. So a bit of fun fact for you, Tara. So, like a tweet would be like 280 characters and War and Peace would be 587,208. And so...
wow,
take your pick.
That's a difference.
That's a huge difference, right? So like in my experience and what we offer here at Cision, I would definitely say between 400 to 600 words, because as you can see by the chart, where people start losing interest when it becomes too long. I get it. Sometimes press release does go over 600 words. Let's say, for example. So think of the context. Think of how you're going to present that. To your readers, and that's going to engage them. So perhaps have part of the information as a bullet point, or have some bold sections to point out the actual point that you're trying to make through your press release. Little things like that, to have it set in a certain way, will definitely engage the reader and make it more readable, and everybody will probably read it end to end. And again, bringing you back to the assets as well, that would definitely help.
Fantastic. So we talked about the length of the press release. And I guess another important point is the headline, because often, headlines are used to grab attention. If PRs are sending out press releases, journalists are getting, inundated with press release as well. So, Fawzia, what are your thoughts about the headline length and what's the best practice?
So there's a few things with the headline. So don't forget, headline is the first thing the reader, the user sees, the blogger. So, when you put into something into the search engine, you see top part, a few words of a headline. Even if you go onto our website, the first things you'll see on today's releases are the headlines. So they have to be informative, they have to be in context. And we say, it's generally the first 70 characters that are really read and people engage with. So using keywords and action verbs is very important. So things like, proves, empowers, allows, confirms. Be very descriptive in your headline, and then the sub-headline will be the second portion that will provide context to what your press release is about. But definitely get your point across in those few words in the headline. Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Liam? I thought you were about to say something then.
Yeah, no, I was. I didn't want to. I have a bad habit of interrupting, but it was interesting.
Not at all.
There was a pause. You're ready.
There you go. I hope you can share. But it's just interesting. I do think. Obviously the headline is critically important for all the reasons that we talked about there. And I've noticed in some of the questions, and we'll obviously get to those in more detail as well. But questions about like how do you what's the kind of right email to send, or how do you get people to open it? And I think what with the feedback we've seen from journalists is, again, it goes back to, like, of course, being relevant, keeping it relatively short, making sure that they understand the news angle and the hook. And I think even when you think about your subject line of the email, it really you should have the same discipline, I think, as you think about with your headline, like exactly what are you saying, what is those kind of words that those action words that you're using. And I think it's so a lot of, I think, what we're talking about within the best practices of a press release, it can apply to the pitch email as well, and how you're constructing that. And I don't know, Tara, if you wanted to add anything to that based on your kind of experience with the particularly the database and leveraging that to send out the emails and press releases.
Yeah, I think sometimes PRs feel that they have to sell the story within a headline. There's a lot of information. For example, from my previous life in healthcare PR, trying to write that headline that gets get the healthcare journalist's attention. You're trying to summarize the press release within a headline. I think it's I think we all do it. We think, we're trying to sort of summarize the press release in the headline. So I think that's something to be very mindful of as well. So the headline shouldn't be summarizing the press release. I think that's something from my previous experience we have to be quite mindful of as well.
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the content review and kind of conscious of the time and making sure that we cover. I really appreciate everyone's Q&As as well. So we will try and get through as much of those as possible as well. So let's move on to the content side of the press release, as we've talked about the headline previously. So these are sort of from our report again. It found that 6 best practices for your content and releases. As you can see here, Liam, you've got the joy of going in a bit more detail about best practice and how and why it's so important, especially with the current climate as well. So would you mind talking us through the 6 content best practices?
Well, I will actually cheat just a little bit, and I'm going to have, I think Foz is going to walk us through the best practices. She's, I think, definitely the expert on that, given all of the work she does on a daily basis with these. What I would like to just point out, as Foz goes through this, keeping in mind as well what we know are best practices around SEO, and particularly how Google is looking at news, right? And how you get that better online pickup. So when you think of Google, there's a couple of things. It wants to be hyper relevant. It wants to be trustworthy content that it's delivering to the search, right? So it wants expertise, that wants to see that it's informative, that there's some unique perspective to the release or to the piece of content. It has to have authority in terms of having an engaging headline or a call to action and the multimedia piece included. And it needs to have trust, right? So when Google is thinking about what it wants to show up at top of the search, it doesn't want something that reads like an ad, has irrelevant content, has too many links. So as we think about the press release, both in terms of how a journalist might look at it or how it might, best practices for putting it together for online, keep in mind that also these help you with the Google and other search engines and how they're kind of parsing through and highlighting and prioritizing content. So that was the point I wanted to make, and now Foz, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree with all that. The best practices definitely as like having the concise headline, making the content interesting as well is important. And then sometimes what happens is headlines also get shared. So keeping to certain characters here, we have it between 55 to 70 is very important. And then obviously bringing back to the multimedia usage, even something simple as your company logo would go a long way. Again, the length of the press release, make sure it's not too long, doesn't bore the reader, and you get your point across rather than giving your own opinion. That's another very important thing. And then formatting, I did touch upon this briefly. So if you do have to do a long release, sometimes we do have, it's November now, so earnings are upon us now. And those releases are very long. So they are formatted with the tables, with the company figures. Some are in bold, some are underlined. So if ever you need to put a release out with more than 600 words, that's fine. It's doable. It's information that needs to be out there. So just make it bullet points, easy to read, easy on the eye. Again, the timings definitely matters. Avoid on the hour, the quarter pasts, and the half pasts, and doing it on the odd minute is something where your release will stand out by itself. It will sit there at 10:03 and it will be noticeable. Also hyperlinks, limit the number of hyperlinks because you don't want a release filled with lots of hyperlinks and anchor text and it just probably looking like spam. So you want to have just those key elements, links in there that probably take the reader to your website or to that particular product or news that you're trying to put out. Also in the about section is the boilerplate. This is the section where you would probably have a brief about the company, what the company does. Here, this is where generally journalists will look out for the hyperlinks, sending them back to the client's website. So that'd be a bit of useful information there. I suppose I could add to this as well. the call to action, so the CTAs. So these are really good as well to have. So, like your Twitter feed, sending it off to being able to send it as an email to a colleague or a friend, if it's like, if you know that there'd be their interest. So these are all really key little widgets and buttons on some of our press releases. Also mentioning the boilerplate. Most journalists do look out for that at the end of the release, and it's called like generally an about section. And then being social friendly, and again, if there is a particular part of the news that you'd like to emphasize, rather than disguising it in another sentence, just put it down into like bold light text, which will then highlight and jump out to the reader to take note on that. I think I can see a question here as well, whether it's Word document or the body of the email. So body of the email generally can corrupt. So Word documents is the best way that we deal with press releases, and also through our editorial system, we also format the release so then it renders correctly with the links and so forth downstream partners. So for that reason, I would definitely say we only use Word documents, not even PDFs. And that will also, save the editor or ourselves when we copy and paste it, if we miss some information, or if we end up putting, if there's some hidden text that gets eliminated by doing that, which can happen. So just to be mindful of that, definitely a Word document I would suggest on that.
Yeah. And I guess also just, I thought something just cropped in my mind. This doesn't appear here. I think sometimes there's a lot of attachments, and obviously if journalists are receiving a lot of press releases and there's lots of attachments, things like that, we mentioned about sort of sharing multimedia and things getting blocked. I think just be mindful of attachments and things like that, not sending too many attachments and things like that, because if journalists want more information, they will definitely get in touch with you. So wherever possible, have as much information in the press release, and obviously any other links and things like that. But avoid from my previous experience, avoid having too many attachments, just to make it easier for everyone just to receive the content as well.
Yeah, I think there's a question here, Maria, saying about the CTAs. I would say, Maria, it's both. Have it so, it could be shared, and also if the client has any of their own feeds to share as well. So I would say it's definitely both. And also with these content basic best practices, this advice has definitely gained 40% increase in leads, what we've realized from the feedback that we have from our clients. So these are definitely key elements to consider when doing your press release.
Fantastic. We're not long to go now with the Q&A, guys, so do keep those questions coming in. Just got two more sort of summary before we do the Q&A, just to keep everyone in the loop. Right, so we've talked about decision content, and apologies that we're sort of blowing our own trumpet here with this example of a press release, but we're talking about it quite a lot, so it's always helpful to have an example. So this was an announcement of our new CEO, Abel Clark. Fozia, why do you think this makes a good release? Besides being a decision press release, what else makes it a good press release?
Where do I begin? We've got some pointers here. Look at the headline. It's short, it's concise, it's to the point. Again, we have the multimedia assets. We have the company logo. So it's visible. It's exactly, the reader knows just by looking at it where this is coming from, rather than having to read the content of the press release and get to the boilerplate section. There's a lovely headshot there. You can all agree on that. And again, the time that we use 9:47. So where you have a sea of releases showing at 10 a.m., 8 a.m., this is showing by itself at 9:47. So it's very poignant that it's there showing clearly on the website. And again, we kept and we formatted the release so it's easy to read on the eye. So you have the image there, you have some text at the top, and then you have the text to the right, the way the eye follows. Reading any press release or any document for that matter. And again, we kept it to 316 words. So this is a complete win-win-win. And we have some like the buttons at the top that you can see just below the logo with the Twitter feed and such, and being able to share the release immediately through social media.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yep. Thank you so much. So were you using it for these purposes, not trying to blow out a trumpet? So thank you very much for that, Fozia. Also, before we move on to the Q&A, just want to let everybody know that Cision provide a great way to review your press releases with our press release analyzer tool. I don't know if people are aware of this, but you can find this on our website, and all you do is input your heading and body text, and the tool will calculate the effectiveness of your release. So you can find this link in the resource box on your screen, so please try it out, as a, kind of putting all our best tips and best practice here for you now as well. So if everybody's ready, I've jotted down as best as I can some of the Q&A that's come through. So let me have a quick look at this, and then we can start doing our Q&A.
Great. There's certainly a lot.
There was a question early on about the report, the main report, whether it was UK or US focus. Is this something, Liam or Fozzie, you can share a little bit of insight about?
Yeah, sure. So the ROIs, the reports are all run. So, I mean, the releases go on the World Wide Web. So, links and the reporting's taken from everywhere where the press release goes. So, I mean, it's huge and it will come from everywhere. Although, say, for example, if you are posting to a UK network, the release does go public. The release will get picked up in other areas, in other countries. I'm not sure if that's that helps with the question, or.
I think the question might have also been related to just, was when we talk about the 100,000 releases that we analysed over our network, was it just US releases? And no, it was taken from around the globe in terms of, I forget the exact numbers, but it did come from Europe and from APAC as well. So it was definitely distributed. Now, we tend to have a larger volume out of the North American market, so certainly that weighed on it, but it was across the globe as well, in terms of like the results we pulled from the 100,000.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that clarification. We've had a couple of questions about embargoes. I don't know what your thoughts are about those. Should all releases have one, especially if, the PRs are targeting national press? Any views on embargoes?
Embargoes, I would say it depends on the nature of the release. So embargoes would mean, so sometimes what happens is clients do get confused with the word embargoes and time queues. So if I can explain how we, the industry, view it. So embargo would mean that it's allowed to be sent out to, say, for example, the Press Association, but not be shared until a specific date and time. So journalists can start prepping their work and writing about that release, but not issuing it until the release goes live. Then there's the other portion where you would time queue a release. So that would be just generally sending out a release, say on 6th of November at 9:01. So it does depend on how quickly or how much you want the journalist to pick up your release and start writing about it and reviewing it, and then be able to distribute it at the particular time that you want it to.
I've just seen on there, is it good practice to lead your subject line with the words press release, or is that just a waste of space and time?
That would be definitely a waste of space and time. We get that. We do get that where the clients probably put in press release with a colon, but yeah, we would remove that. We wouldn't include that.
Fine. I guess we talked about sort of, the press release helping, maintain relationships with journalists. I think in this age and time as well, it's quite difficult. And I guess back in the day when we were all allowed to meet and have a coffee and things like that with a journalist to maybe pitch a story and things like that. Any sort of tips and advice about how best to do that now? Is it more kind of doing that remotely, and any thoughts on that in terms of prior to sending out the press release? Because, we can't meet journalists now at the moment, especially with lockdown.
I don't know if I have any exact hints on how to engage them when you don't have coffee, and I mean that's clearly a challenge. For me, I think the most effective way of building the relationship is just again to really take the time to understand the topics, the subjects, the audience that journalist is really engaging with, and then making sure that you kind of can feed them that type of content. I think, frankly, like I think the person said, everyone's so busy today, it's hard to get them away. So I think the way you build a relationship is just by making sure you really target what you're sending to that person and that they can use it. And I've seen some other sort of questions in here around, in terms of even the multimedia and using data, and should you use graphs? And I would say yes. If you think about the easier you make the journalist's job, the better. So if you can take your data and have it into a very nice graph, if you can have an infographic, or you can have links out to tables, or they can download some Excel that they can then manipulate if they want into their own charts and graphs, all of that is where you can really help build a relationship, because you're making their job easier when their job is getting harder by the day. So I think that's the advice I would give.
Of course. I think we also had an early question about whether what your thoughts are about using a short covering note. Is that something worth using, or do you just go straight away with the press release?
So covering note, I'm thinking here, sending it direct to a journalist's inbox, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, we would target the press. I mean, the release will be targeted to that journalist, like Liam said earlier. So I don't think a cover note would do anything. I think just having the news release there, which is what the journalist is looking for and wants and needs, would be much better than having like a cover letter or anything like that.
And do you think, obviously, is there more pressure now to send story, as we talk about sort of, the press release being newsworthy, every time we turn the TV on and so on? Besides the US election, it's all about COVID. So are there more pressures now more than ever to make sure that your story is more COVID related, do you think?
We've recently seen that, people are getting used to this new way of living, whether there's a lockdown and restrictions. So yes, there is still information going out about COVID and things of that nature, but also I think people are moving on. And I mean, we had some releases on hold from just back in March, where, so for example, offices were opening, products were being developed, and we can see those now releases coming through, filtering through. Like I've said, it's like November now, so it's earnings. So a lot of the companies are focusing on that. They are sending out their earnings releases, because this is probably the way we are working now, working from home with COVID. People are, recognizing that and thinking that, it just doesn't stop at COVID now. They're realizing that, we've had releases about travel and tourism, right, Liam? Where, the new resorts have been opened. So.
Oh, you still there, Fozzie? Fozzie, you still there? Oops, technology.
She may have frozen. Well, as we're waiting for her to come back, I think I can take that on as well. I think, one of the things we know, we did another State of the Media survey earlier on, coming into the year, just as COVID was starting. We went back and asked journalists, like how has it changed for them? And, I think one of the messages we got back is that, people also want non-COVID news. They want good news. They want stuff that is less less about the pandemic. And so I think when I go back and think of like the how-tos and some of the thought leadership and other pieces that you can get away from COVID and get back into some of that, to what Foz said about kind of, living within the new normal. So I don't think it all has to be COVID related.
Fantastic. In terms, we talked about timings. We've got a question here. How far in advance of events would you suggest sending out a press release? Any thoughts on that, Liam?
Yeah, I think, look, if it's a press release about an event, you probably want to make sure, right, that they got enough time. Well, I suppose people aren't traveling, but have time to kind of organize that. Again, I think it's helpful to probably understand, like, when people are doing research and when they have to publish. So maybe someone's doing research, near the end of the week to publish next Monday or Tuesday. So you want to get the release to them, in the time that they're they're doing their research. And I think it also depends on the news. If it's something that you think the journalist should be able to just pick up fairly quickly, maybe do a quick interview, then maybe you can do it a little bit closer. If you're really trying to engage the journalist to really do a more in-depth piece, maybe set up an interview that's a little bit more involved, then I think you want to give yourself a little bit more time. But it's tough, right? You're trying to understand what the client is doing or what the journalist with some timing. Yeah.
What's their agenda, I guess, in terms of what they're trying to cover as well. So if a PR's incorporated, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry,
back.
Sorry, I think you lost me. I'm sorry.
Don't worry. I think Liam finished the end of the sentence there for you.
Liam? Thank you. Thank you.
So a really good question, and I think sort of quite a few questions about if you've done everything, taken all the top tips that we've discussed today. If you notice your press release hasn't received as much pickup as expected, is there any worthwhile way of following up with journalists? Are follow-up phone calls or emails seen as badgering?
Yeah, I think I don't know, Tom. Maybe you're best to answer that in terms of some of your background with the with the kind of the email and follow up.
Yeah, definitely. I think I had an occasion where obviously it's quite a long time. The PRs had called everyone on the same title. It was literally a ring round, back in the day we were all in the office. So one person had a call about the press release, another person. So definitely avoid that. But I think, it's fair enough to do a quick follow-up call. And I think, avoid saying, have you got a minute to talk about my press release? Did you receive that? I think, they're getting inundated. So, do a follow-up call. But, make sure you speak to the right person, not speak to all features and news and, trying your luck. So I think, you're not badgering, you're just doing your due diligence to check if the story is of interest. But also, don't be frightened to ask, if this particular story, wasn't quite appropriate for you, what angle, what news hook would you recommend? What would be getting your interest? Because at least you're having that conversation, you're building that momentum with the journalist, because you're showing that you care and you really want to pitch to them, the right story. So I think it's a valid question. I think sometimes PRs feel a bit sort of hesitant to say, if this press release isn't relevant for you, is it relevant to another colleague, or what angle would make it more appealing for you? So don't hesitate on asking that as well. So do obviously do your follow-ups as well.
Yeah.
Just kind of quick look on. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I would just say on that too, asking if there's any additional information needed or anything missing. I think one thing that struck me in looking at the reports, both the state of the media and the press releases, journalists really want you to make their job easy. Like, don't make them go hunt for information. And I think, and if you have interviews that you can set up, make sure that's highlighted. So, maybe it's, to your point, checking if you're the right person, but also if there's anything else they need, and make sure that you've done all they have to get. To pretty much
And a lot of our PRs work with lots of experts, and I think right now it's really topical. Obviously it doesn't have to be COVID related, but if there's an expert, someone who has a key angle or a business angle or a different angle to what everyone is talking about, I think that's always really super helpful as well in terms of any additional imagery, videos, and things like that. So if you've got that journalist interested already, do tell them that you've got other assets that you can provide as well.
Yeah.
Let me just have a quick look. I think another question here, with obviously everyone working from home now, is it better to email than call? Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yes, I definitely say. I've realised through our department, and through Cision, emailing is definitely a quicker method of communicating these days. Yes, the phone calls are there for those emergency, quick information requests, but definitely I think email is the way to go forward in asking questions, seeking advice, because then what would happen is we can have like an editor or a CSS person call you up and ring you, and then if the need be is like to go through details with you over the phone. But it does depend on, like, say for example, if it's something that's already been submitted that needs to be changed last minute, then obviously a phone call would be much quicker and easier to do. But definitely otherwise, I think I've seen a lot of email comms happening.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot now, Fawzia. How effective is PR Newswire? Do journalists really look at those press releases?
Yeah, we do. It shows through our ROIs, and also we're a reliable source. We're a trusted source. So when we do distributions to our affiliates, obviously we have relationships with them, so it's going through an affiliate, it's going through it's going direct through a news agency. But in addition, we do tailor our wire and our product to journalist email lists, so it won't be spam. So they will see that it comes from PR Newswire, and we're a trusted source, and that release will get looked at because it's the relationship that we build over time with individual journalists, and as and when we theme and tag the release appropriate to the topics that we have. Yes, definitely, that's key. Yeah, no, they definitely. I mean, we wouldn't go to their spam box, put it that way.
Yeah, great. What about local press? Because we mustn't forget that it's not just about nationals and broadcasters, but some of our PRs are working with local press and trying to raise awareness within the different regions. Is PR Newswire good for local press as well?
Yes, of course. We cover all ranges, so definitely yes, we can do. We can hit out on target distribution lists that are niche to a certain region. We've done that before, we still continue to do that. And yes, we definitely have that broad reach of the media as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the local news in particular, I know in the US, and I think it's the same in Europe. I just spoke to someone in the Nordics recently, same issue there. And in Asia, a lot of the local news organizations are struggling. They're cutting back on staff. And so I think, the more you can tailor your news to local audiences, it can be very effective. And so maybe it's the broader release for the national story, but then you're targeting more specifically globally as well. But I definitely think there's a lot to be gained from making sure you hit that local angle. Absolutely.
Perfect. Sort of a different source in terms of distributing press release. Someone's here just asked about how effective do you think LinkedIn press releases are in terms of expanding brand awareness and pursuing new leads. Do you guys have any thoughts about utilizing LinkedIn to distribute press releases?
Well, as long as you include PR, Cision as part of your strategy, certainly. Look, I think that it really is a multi-channel thing, right? I think that there's absolutely a place for your social channels and for putting your press releases there. And as we said earlier, a lot of the best practices that we talk about, particularly in terms of formatting, what Foz was talking about, bolding, bullets, making sure that it's not heavy in the text paragraphs. All of that really applies, obviously, online. So I think LinkedIn, your social channels, all very, very important. And then, of course, you're looking for the journalist to do the pickup piece. And then, frankly, a newswire, then takes your release, and as Foz explained, because of the way we tag it and the way we target it, it'll start placing it on, not only into the right newsrooms or for the right journalists, but on the right websites relevant to your content. So, for me, it really is always going to be about a multi-channel approach. And I think these best practices kind of go across all of those.
Definitely. Well, coming back to the local journalists, Fawzia, just a good question here about any stats about local journalists and how many subscribe to PR Newswire. Do you have any intel on that at all?
I'm going to be honest, to hand, I don't have that information to hand because I do focus a lot on, we can follow that one up because I do have a lot of focus on the wire portion, and the wire portion, I will admit that we do have a very wide reach through affiliates. And when I say affiliates, I mean like the news agencies direct. Our feed is sent directly to them and posted directly to them, whether it be the Middle East or something simple as Spain. So, yeah, definitely our reach is definitely out there. And then with the local journalists, I would definitely say that we tailor the news releases so it goes directly into their inboxes.
No problem. We'll keep going until we get cut off, maybe. But obviously time's almost up, and I know obviously everyone's super busy. Obviously there was one or two questions about social media and, you know, sort of maybe pitching a story via Instagram, especially for maybe fashion brands or, you know, brands that have a lot of imagery and things like that. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? I mean, we kind of touched upon it when we talked about LinkedIn, but I guess social media is a different channels, but any thoughts about that?
Yeah, you know, I think absolutely. You know, I think the point we made earlier was that, you know, thinking of if you have great imagery that you're posting on Instagram, right, or you're a food, you know, or you've got, you know, fashion or travel or whatever it is. You know, again, I think repurposing that into your press release is the point we were making earlier. You know, so to, you know, instead of maybe using your logo, using some video or using some data graphs, you know, whatever you're using elsewhere, I think that makes an awful lot of sense. You know, I know that, you know, the other thing to think about, I think, is journalists and editors, I mean, they frankly want eyeballs on their website, right? So if you can provide them within the story, say, multiple photos that then they can create into a montage on the site where someone can click through, or a piece of video that would increase engagement on their site. I mean, you know, they're looking for that as well. So I think you know, absolutely using imagery on Instagram clearly is important. But you know, I think again, thinking of taking that and repurposing it into your press release, into your other channels is important.
So multi-channels the way forward, and so on. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to you both, Liam and Fawzia. You know, I think, you know, everyone's been finding all these top tips, and, you know, a lot of PRs are doing that as well, but it's always useful to kind of get a recap as well. So thank you everyone for all your Q&A. It's been great to see the engagement and lots of excellent questions. I think we're going to leave it there, if that's okay. We're going to conclude our discussion now. But, you know, if obviously any more questions, do let us know with following up as well. So, yeah, thank you, everybody. And I encourage you to head over to the Cision UK website or use the link below to download the 2020 State of the Press Release report. It's free and a really useful document to have just for reference as well. So thank you again to both Liam and Fawzia, and thank you everyone for joining and for all the excellent questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.